Hello, my name is Warren Reed. This is OLT 322, Lecture 1. One of the points that are mentioned in the beginning of the course materials is that in this course we study writers who are exploring an expression of self-consciousness from slavery to the present day. And basically that means that they are trying to explore African American identity, and that's because they lost, and over the generations they lost a sense of identity, who they were, where they're from, who their families were, and this was part of the way the slave masters controlled them by separating families, taking babies from mothers at birth, and so on. So you grow up, you don't even know who you are, you just know that your life is about waking up early, before the sun, going to work, and going to bed late. Each writer is adding something to this sense of identity, and we'll see. So it's very important that each lecture you think about that, and we've tried in the course materials and in the extra stuff that I've created, we try to bring that up. These writers are adding this. These are questions that are important. You need to think about them. Also, another point, this course is only about African American writers. So in the exams, we're asking about African American writers. So in a question, don't say Chinua Achebe, okay, Wole Soyinka, Shaban Robert, okay? That's very nice, but this course is about African American writers, and we want to know what you've learned about these writers, okay? So don't bother. Okay, if you don't know, just leave it, find a question you know. But don't give us stuff that has nothing to do with the question. Okay, important points. Slavery was mostly in the southern states because that's where they had big plantations of cotton, tobacco, and sugar, and those crops take a lot of work. Even now with loads of machinery, there's still lots of work, physical labor in those. Another point, the slave trade itself, the buying and selling of captured people who were not slaves, turning them into slaves, that ended in 1808. But slavery, owning and reselling people who were already slaves, that didn't end in the USA until 1865. With the end of the Civil War, all the slaves were given their freedom. Okay, so another point for exams, sometimes there's a question about the Harlem Renaissance, and students say, this writer was fighting against slavery. No, the Harlem Renaissance was in the 1920s and 30s. Slavery ended in 1865. So you can do the math and see why that's a problem in an exam question. All right, so slavery ended. And the southern whites found, oh my God, we are in big trouble because now we're seriously outnumbered. So, if the slaves can start voting, they're going to take over everything and we're going to be down at the bottom. So what did they do? They had this thing called Jim Crow laws. And it was not official laws, it was a socially kind of enforced laws. Blacks can't go here, only whites here, blacks can go there, okay, that sort of thing. And and they used violence to enforce this through the KKK, which is Ku Klux Klan. White men would dress up in these white clothes with white pointy hats, and they'd ride around and terrorize black people. If a black man did something wrong, they would go and kill him or hang him. Many times they hanged people. That's called lynching. They did that a lot, and it scared blacks from doing anything like asking for their rights to be enforced. Okay. Another thing is at the end of slavery, all of a sudden, well, they have nowhere to go, nowhere to live, and they owned nothing. So in the end, they ended up being farmers on the same plantations where they were slaves. Yes, so they would do some work in exchange for their own little plot of land to raise their own few crops, and often they had nothing to start with, so the plantation owner had his own company store, and he would sell them stuff on credit and at very bad terms. So basically, they became indentured slaves in a way that they could never live the end of their credit. Do you understand? They owed so many things. Every time they owed. So they keep doing work. They couldn't get out of it. Okay. Some ex-slaves, they moved north because they heard there was better chances up there and less racism. And in some part that was true, but it wasn't like a golden pathway like they hoped. However, they did, as you read in later chapters, they met free blacks, and so they had a big exchange of ideas. Okay, African American literature has its beginnings in oral literature, as we know. There were songs and stories that came with the slaves, such as the Anansi stories from Ghana, which are mentioned, and there were stories in East and West Africa about the clever rabbit outwitting the lion and the hyena, and in America they became the Brer Rabbit stories, Brother Rabbit, and of course the rabbit represents the black people who have to be clever and outwit the lion and the hyena in order to survive. In order to survive against the more physically powerful oppressors. Also then, we have the Negro spirituals, and there's an example I've got for you, that God's Children Got Shoes. I found a recording of that song so you can hear that. It's on the Moodle.
I got shoes, you got shoes, all of God's children got shoes, my Lord, yes. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes and gonna walk all over God's heaven.
The Negro spirituals gave a creative outlet for dealing with the terrible conditions of the slaves and then the former slaves. The musical roots are African, but the stories are mostly from the Bible. The songs are both communal and private, because usually it's expressing one person's particular suffering, but in that way they're also representing the struggles of the whole community and the hopes of the community. The songs also represent Christian virtues such as patience and tolerance, with the idea that at least in heaven they will be free and at peace. Now, this passive way is different from what later writers discuss about freedom and what they discover, such as in the slave narratives and Frederick Douglass, who found his sense of freedom when he fought back against Covey, the master. So here's an example of what we're talking about, this self-consciousness. The Negro spiritual, it's about tolerance and it's trying to find some joys while you can, in the hope and looking for that freedom and joy in the afterlife. Okay, and other writers say, no, I want it now. That's an example of this progression of growing self-consciousness and how it expresses itself. And that's enough for Lecture 1. Come back in a few minutes for Lecture 2. High points, highlights, and exam tips. Thank you.